Welcome to the Arlington Heights Society of Model Engineers. My name is Jeff. Today we will be working on a Craftsman kit from railroadkits.com. This is Dannen Feeds. It's a small rural feed store, and it's a great introductory kit to building Craftsman kits. So follow along as we do it, and hopefully you'll find some techniques that will work for you. And right now we are looking for a place where we can place the building once it's complete. This probably won't be it, but we'll find some place for it. Okay, so let's take a look at what we've got in the kit. We have a bag of windows. I've already taken these out and primed them so they're ready to paint when we get to that point. A sheet of paper with signs for the building. Some cardboard to use as roof panels. The kit walls, including the small side wall, the end walls, some strip wood that will be used for bracing and for trim, and a piece of construction paper that's got slits cut into it to use for the roofing material. The tools we're going to be using to begin the first step are laid out here. I've got a razor saw, some tweezers which we may need, hobby knives, one with a number 11 blade, one with a 17 blade, an assortment of sanding sticks, some 1-2-3 blocks, a scale rule, and some tape-on wood glue. The very first thing you want to do whenever you start a kit like that is read the instructions. You may not necessarily do things in the order that's in the instructions, but understand what they are, and then you can make some decisions as to what you're going to do. Now this kit, the first step they recommend doing is bracing and then staining, but they do say you can stain and paint before you brace. I'm going to do the bracing first. So for the bracing we are going to need the 1/8 inch strip wood, which they have color coded with black on the end. So we will get that out of the bundle. And there's 3 pieces of it here. We are going to put the rest of the things that we need later aside for use when we get there so we don't lose them. Okay, the first step is to remove the walls from any carrying strip and remove any openings that are window openings that are closed in. We do that simply by using an X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade and cutting through the little tabs that hold it in place. These come out nice and clean. I'm going to do another one here. And the piece pops out. In addition to removing the windows, you also need to separate any walls that are connected together. Again, a pass with the nice sharp X-Acto knife. One tip I have for you is I always start a project with brand new blades in my knife. Good sharp blades are going to help prevent injury and get through the cuts you need to make. Okay, after the pieces are cut out, I'm cutting bracing for them. I've got most of it done. I'm using a Northwest Shortline chopper, which is a convenient tool to have and makes cutting the bracing quick and easy and gets you the exact fit you need each time. In addition to cutting the bracing, before you install it, you want to make sure you clean off any edges on the wood. So if there's nubs from where you cut them from a carrier sheet, a quick wipe with a sanding stick will take care of it and clean it up nicely. To attach the bracing, we're going to use a yellow carpenter's glue. In this case I'm using Tite Bond, which happens to be my favorite, and you just need a thin layer. Too much glue and it will ooze out and make it harder to finish your model when the time comes. You want to avoid having that ooze out. So a thin layer. On the side walls, per the instructions, we are going to put them right up against the edge and make sure they're flush using a 1-2-3 block, a machinist 1-2-3 block. I'm also keeping it 1/8 of an inch from the bottom, which is the pencil line you see, because I want to add a foundation to the kit when we're done. As we put the bracing on, we want to make sure we are flush against the edge. We can do that using our 1-2-3 machinist block or any straight edge you have to make sure we're flush against the edge. And I put a pencil line 1/8 of an inch from the bottom because I want to add a foundation to this in a later step. Okay, once we have the bracing attached to the wall, we're going to use our block as weight and slide it aside as we continue working on the other walls. Okay. The peaked walls are a little bit different on the bracing because of how it's set up and where the windows are cut. And because we're putting the bracing on the side walls at the ends, we need to leave a 1/8 inch offset on the sides of the peaked walls. And because I don't have a 1/4 of an inch here, I'm not going to brace this wall over here, but I do want to add a second piece of bracing in the middle. Now that the bracing is dried, we're going to add nail holes to this using a straight edge and a pounce wheel. And just run it along the straight edge. It creates little indentations, approximately 1 per board, to represent nail holes. And while you can probably see them in the video here, they will really show up once we start staining and painting the walls. You want to make sure you only run along the wall 1 time in each location to get that. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is stain the walls and the strip wood used for the bracing. This is an India ink and alcohol wash, 70% isopropyl alcohol, and it's got about 2 teaspoons of India ink in here. When I made it, I did not measure exactly, and I'm just dipping the strip wood in, and then I'll spread it out to dry on a paper towel. You want to keep it separate so it doesn't stick together and encourage warping, and so it dries. For the walls, I'm using a soft bristled brush that I only use for applying India ink wash, and I'm going across the boards, so across the clapboards on this wall. And you can see as I do this that the nail holes start to pop up on here. It doesn't have to be even and even coverage. This is just going to be a base coat of color on these, and you can bring it down and I try and start at the top of the walls and work my way down the wall. You don't want to let this pool up because you don't want to do anything that will cause warping. Fortunately, because we're using an alcohol base, it evaporates very quickly, and this will dry also very quickly and get absorbed into the wood. You'll see how the nail holes have really started to pop now that the ink wash has been applied. Just as a quick tip, now that the stain is on there and set, I flipped them over. I put some weight on it to help prevent the walls from warping. Okay, now that the ink wash is dried, we are going to start painting. This is the effect we're looking for. A red paint that's been peeling off. And I'm going to show you how we created that. We're using a sponge painting method. I am working with a craft paint. This is just a red. Get this at any craft store, your favorite craft or hobby store. Even big box stores like Walmart and Target carry them. I'm putting some paint on the sponge, and then I'm dabbing off most of it, just like you would with the dry brush technique. We have just a little bit, and then we're going to start dabbing it on. It's always better to have a light coat and have to add more than to have too heavy of a coat and have to try and take it off or redo it. Now, if the final color looks a little bit too red for you, we can also add some brick red paint to our mix. And kind of mix the two together. And add on top of it. The final color will also tone down as we weather the building in later steps. For the trim, I'm going to use a Craft Smart Vanilla, which is an off-white. And when I'm looking for white, I try and use a slightly off-white because the pure white is going to be too bright. So I'm going to use a clean sponge for this. Again, we're going to get some on our paint, on our brush. Dab it off and just use the trim sticks to create that peeled paint effect on it. And we want to make sure we get at least 2 of the 3 sides. But I like to get them all that way. I don't have to pay attention to which sides have been painted and which ones haven't as I'm adding the trim to the walls. With the paint applied, the next step is simply give the paint time to dry. The key with a structure like this is You can have the best tools in the world, you can have the best paints, but you don't need them. Cheap craft store paints work great. But the one thing you can't skimp on is patience. You just need to give it the time to do things like dry. We were speaking of being patient, and one of the things you can do while you're being patiently waiting for the walls to dry is start working on the windows and doors. So we're going to start by removing them from their carrier sheets. Now, I already primed these in advance so that they could be painted easily and quickly. And you can do this like I am with a hobby knife, or if you have a sprue cutter, you can use those. I just find that sometimes the knife gives me better control. And then once out of the sprues, use my sanding stick to clean up any burrs and edges. Be careful so you don't break anything. If they do, it'll fix it. It'll be fine once you remove them, once you glue them into the building. Okay, so we're going to use the same sponge technique on the windows that we used on the walls. You do want to make sure you are painting the outside of the window. So we're doing now, because these are plastic, the paint is going to, you're not going to get the same peeled paint effect. So we will create that look using weathering when the time comes. Now that the walls and trim have dried, while the windows dry, we can attach the trim to the sides of the walls. Now I always cut my trim a little bit on the long side, knowing that I can trim it short, trim it to exact length once it's dried. And I'm again going to use my 1, 2, 3 blocks to hold it secure against it. Now this last piece on this side is going to be a little trickier because we only want glue far enough down to get it, but the wall needs to extend. The trim has to extend the whole way because the door will attach to it. So we'll mark where the door is going to go, and we're going to apply our glue. And you want to make sure you use a very thin layer on the trim because you don't want it leaking out onto the front of the wall where it'll be noticeable. So now we can bring it in and glue it into place. Make sure your glue side is facing your wall, and our 1, 2, 3 blocks will hold them in place as clamps. The other thing we're going to need to trim is, I've already done this wall, and you can see the effect of the white and red, and we also need to do our little short wall that will go here against the upper portion. As you can see, I've cut most of these a little bit long, and Now with everything in, you'll notice that I did cut these a little bit on the long side. It's always easier to trim them once the glue has dried than it is to try and add to it if you cut too short. Okay, I don't know if you can see it, but I've already attached the clear acetate window glazing to the doors. And now we're going to do the four windows. I've pre-cut this so that it'll fit nicely into the window. And it just drops right into the casting. And then I'm going to use a little bit of canopy glue and just a little dot in each corner. The canopy glue will dry clear, but this will get it in and allow it to hold in place. But because we're just using little dots in a little amount, if we have to ever remove the canopy glue, the window glazing, to do other work, we'll be able to pop it out. If you prefer to glue more firmly, you could take your canopy glue and very carefully run a bead, a very small bead, right along the inside edge here. Using a toothpick, or you could probably use a micro brush. I prefer a toothpick for this because it gives me much more control. And then again, just drop the glazing in place and let it dry. You don't have to worry too much if it oozes out, because it will dry clear. You can even actually use it to make the windows if you so desire, and I know people who do that, although that's not my preferred method of glazing windows. You simply fill in the openings between the mullions with the canopy glue, and when it dries, okay, now that the glazing's installed, we're going to install the windows into the openings on the wall. And I'm going to use Eileen's tacky glue for that, because that is very good for holding windows and doors. And I'm just going to run a bead on the inside of the window opening. Again, you want to be sparingly with the glue so you don't get it on the outside of the building. Make sure when you put the window in that you get the part with the sill facing down, and it pops right in. And then we'll do the same with the other opening here. And slowly the walls will start to come together. With the side walls, make sure you know which side is up, and you can tell by looking at the clapboard. You'll see that the edge that sticks out a little is always the bottom. So I have my thumb at the bottom of the wall here. Okay, now that the windows are installed, it's time to move to the doors. This kit has a main door down here and a top loading door for the upper level up here. I've already painted the door. It's going to be the same red, but we're going to trim it with white. To install this, I'm going to use the Aleene's tacky glue, just like I did to install the windows into the building, and just run a bead along the edge of the door, being careful not to get it on the outer surface. If there's a little on the inside surface, that's okay, because nobody's going to see that. And then we got some excess here we can take to do the bottom. And then we're going to take and drop it into the opening, and I have it face down on here so the door sits kind of flush with the front of the building. We will let that dry. While we're waiting for that to dry, I've also cut some trim pieces which we will apply around the door, and for that we're going to go back to the tight bond glue. So I'm going to put down a little bit. Don't need a whole lot for this. That should be enough. And grab a clean toothpick. I find that toothpicks make great applicators, and they're really inexpensive. Again, we're going to be very careful to only put a limited thin bead on here, because we don't want it to squeeze out on us. And then I cut this so that it sits on the outside. Ahead. Sometimes using the tweezers just makes holding things a little easier while you're working. And everything doesn't always go as perfectly as you would like. Take your time and be patient. And your project is going to come together. Now with the trim done on the upper door, we can move to the main door, and we're going to install that with the Eileen's tacky glue. Again, we're going to run a bead of it along the top here and along the side, this side, and along the trim piece. And then just fit this into the opening. And set that aside to dry. Okay, I've already trimmed up most of the trim pieces on the walls, but we still have the front wall to do, and I'm just going to show you real quick. I cut the top, and this just popped loose, but I trim it at the same angle as the roof line. And at the door, we're going to trim it at the bottom. And I'm holding it in place to help keep it there, and do the same thing on the other side. If anything comes loose while you're doing it, simply re-glue it. Once you've trimmed it to length, take a sanding stick and just run it over quickly just to get it smooth and even. So everything lines up once you get your walls together. Okay, we've got the walls installed and the doors and windows. I've actually started gluing together the first two sections to make a right-handed corner, and then we're going to add our third door. You want to make sure you've got your bottom facing down so you're gluing on the right side. We're going to add a bead of glue to the bracing piece and the edge of the trim. And again, we want to keep the glue thin because we don't want it oozing out onto the front of the building. And we're going to use our 1, 2, 3 blocks to get in here and keep things square, straight and square. Now we're going to the last wall for this one. We're going to be applying our glue to the existing walls here. A bead here. Again, we're going to keep it nice and thin. A bead on this side. And on this side of it as well, on the inside and the inside top, because that will glue to the bracing on the other wall. Now we can stand things up, bring the wall in, bring in our 1, 2, 3 blocks to hold everything nicely together. The last piece of wall we need to do is this little side wall that is going to go in here. So we can now take that and get a little more glue out. Okay, so now we'll take the small side wall. We're going to apply glue, again a small bead to the bracing. We want to catch it on the inside in the L form between the bracing and the trim, and if you do like I did and get some on the wrong surface, wipe it off with your finger. Make sure you know where the bottom of your trim piece, your wall piece is. And with my bad eyesight, I sometimes have to bring it up close to my eyes to see it. But then we can bring that in and glue that into place. Our feed store is now getting close to being finished. We have a few more steps to do. We need to put the roof on, and I also want to put a foundation on, which I'm going to scratch build, and the loading dock. So we will start with that step next. Okay, so we're going to install signs on the building. We're going to use this Purina sign, but as you can see, it doesn't quite fit without covering the window. We want to make this look like it was painted on. So I took the sign, I've thinned it, sanded it thin. Now, in order to get it to fit, what I want to do is trim out this bottom corner, approximately 1 square that overlaps the window. So it'll look almost like the sign was there and the window was added afterwards. Okay, so we're trimming out this bottom red square. We're going just a little above into the white square. As we do that, and now we can take the building, and if we test fit, we should be able to butt the sign against the trim and right around the window frame. Alright, we're really coming along on the model. So with the signs, the paper is really, it's a heavy, thick paper. So to thin it out, I used 180 grit sandpaper and just sanded the sign, the back of the sign, until I could almost see through the signs. And this piece I'm doing has a number of smaller signs on it that we may use later in the build. Okay, remember we notched out this corner for the window. So now in order to install this, we're going to flip the sign over. We're going to use the Eileen's tacky glue that we've been using to install the windows. And we're going to spread a layer of this onto the back of the sign. Make sure you get all the way to the edges if you're doing this. And again, it doesn't need to be a thick coat, but it does need to get all the way to the edges. So that it sticks down completely. And then we're going to bring it up, and because our window is our crucial positioning, we're going to get it in there and make sure we line everything up, get everything lined up nice and square. At the top and at the window. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is using a round toothpick. We're going to burnish this sign into the siding so that you kind of see the siding through there, and the sign looks like it's been painted on. This will give you that look. The final step in this, after we've got finished burnishing, is we're going to use the same red paint that we used on the walls, and very lightly we're going to dab little bits on it so it looks like part of the sign has peeled off and the red paint from underneath is showing through. Now you can see, you may be able to see, I hope it's showing up on the video, the lines of the clapboard in the sign. Coming through. Okay, now that the sign's been burnished to the sides, we're going to use the red paint we had that we used on the wall, And again, we're just going to use a little bit on the sponge and dab most of it off until we can barely see anything coming off the sponge as we work. We just want to be able to put little dots, and then we're very lightly going to hit the sign with it to create the look that the sign is peeling off underneath and the red paint underneath is showing through. Now I've also installed the Dannen feed sign on the other side, and we're going to do the same thing with the paint. This was installed the same way. And just a little bit, lightly tapping it to get the look that it's starting to peel. Okay, now that the signs are painted on, installed on, we're going to install a foundation. The foundation is going to be so that we can raise the building up a little bit to add a scratch-built loading dock. I'm using pieces of 1/32 by 1/2 inch strip wood that I've just painted a concrete color. And we will take, again, using our wood glue. Remember, we left that 1/8 inch base where we didn't put any bracing on the corners at the bottom for just that this purpose. We can take our base piece and slide it into place. Okay, I'm holding it just a second to get the glue to tack on. Now we're going to flip it over and do the same thing on the opposite side. When I cut the pieces, I cut them so that the long sides, the sides of the building, would be full-length pieces, and then the front and back would fit between them. All right, we've got the second side in place. The ends were designed to cut. I cut them to fit between there. So we're going to now do this side. And again, we're going to spread our yellow wood glue in that 1/8 inch strip we left and insert the wall and hold it in place. I'm not worried about an exact fit on this, because the loading dock we're going to put is going to cover most of this anyways. That leaves us down to our last side, the front of the building. This one is going to be a little trickier because we have the plastic door. Okay, since this piece was a little bit long, I'm just sanding down the end to get it to fit, and then we'll test fit to make sure it slides in where we need it to. And not quite, we need a little bit more. This side doesn't look like it's completely square, so we'll take, now that we've done that, we're going to test fit again, and this time it's a perfect fit. So because we have plastic that we're attaching to here, we're going to have to glue a little differently. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the glue on the inside of the front wall in our 1/8 inch space, and on this piece we're going to put some glue right on the edges here to attach to the other side of the foundation. Now I can bring this in, attach it in place, make sure I'm level, and hold it in, and use the back half of a toothpick just to remove this glue that flowed out and clean that up a little bit. Okay, we're now ready to add the roof to the building. So I've got the subroof. These are cardboard pieces, They come pre-cut. The top roof is scored down the middle, so we just fold it in half, and then we are going to paint the bottom sides of these with our trim color. And we're going to do that because there's going to be a little bit of an overhang and we want to see it come through. And we really don't need to worry about the whole roof. We just want to get enough of it, of the edges, so that our trim, it shows through on the trim. Now these are so small that just as easy to do the whole thing. And again, we can do the sponge painting because we don't need the full coverage, just enough to create the illusion that it's painted wood and maybe peeling and older and hasn't been updated as much. Okay, the next step on the roof, now that we've got the underside painted, is to take care of the top. This metal comes with a tar paper roof section, and you see it's just black construction paper that's cut into strips. We're going to need 2 strips to do the small roof, so we're just going to cut them out of the paper. And we're going to need some of our Eileen's tacky glue. And we're just going to put, again, a thin layer on the cardboard, trying to get all the way to the ends. This can also be done using 3M transfer tape. If you've never worked with that, it is a fun product. Unfortunately, I don't have any with me to work on this. But it is like a very thin double-sided tape. It's actually just the adhesive from tape. Now, we're going to start with what will be the bottom of the roof, and we're going to lay a piece of tar paper, and I like to overhang the end of the roof just a little bit. And I want to keep it straight and square as I lay the piece on. And on the sides we can overhang as much as we need to because we can trim it off later. The second piece is going to come on, and we're going to need to get all the way up to the top, but we can overhang the second piece, overlap the second piece a little bit. You always want your top work from your bottom down, so that as water's running down the roof, it doesn't get under the tar paper or under the roofing material, whether it's tar paper or shingles. Once that's done, we can flip it over and we can trim our sides flush. And again, keeping track of where our ridge is, we can then place this in place, and that's where this will end up going. Now we're going to work on the main roof. Again, we're going to spread glue on here, and we're going to do enough for 2 sheets on each side. So we're going to do the first side here. Again, we want to make sure we get it all the way across this side of the roof. And we're going to put on the first sheet so it's just at the bottom and the overhanging just a hair. Press that into place. Take a second sheet, have it on so it overlaps just slightly and comes in here straight. Now we're going to flip around and do the same thing on the other side. We're getting close. We have just, next step is going to be to install the roofs. We're going to start with the small lower roof. I'm just going to use a little bit of our wood glue, and we're just going to run it right along the edge here and across the top of the building of each of the walls. Again, just a thin layer is sufficient. To handle the back, Again, you want to make sure you know where your front is, and I can feel the lip here. So this is the top wall edge. I'm just going to run a quick layer of glue along here, and then we're going to bring this in and trying to keep it centered. We're going to put it in place. Hold it down and just use my fingernail to clean up any glue that's oozed out onto the rooftop. For the top roof, we're going to do the same thing. We don't have an edge of the roof we have to worry about because all edges are going to go down the side, but we do need to get glue on the structure. And now we can place the roof on top, and you'll notice that I did not put the ridge cap on the roof, and there's a reason for that. Because it's going to be a folded piece, it's a lot easier to do that after the roof is in place and we've got the fold in its position on the subroof. So I'm just going to hold this in place for a minute and add our tacky glue to the subroof here and here. And now we can take this and set this in place and let everything dry. Once it's dry, we will trim the ridge cap to length, and the building will for the most part be finished. We're still going to add a scratch built loading dock around it, but we'll be ready to go. Okay, with the roof installed and the tar paper trimmed to length, the only thing left to do is to highlight the roofing with a little bit of weathering to help show off the seams of the tar paper. And we're going to do that with pan pastel. These are a chalk, but they've got a mix in there that helps it adhere to flat matte surfaces like the tar paper. And we're going to use a number of different colors. I'm going to start with a light gray, and we want to really do almost a dry brushing. So we're going to wipe it off so we just have a little bit on the sponge, and we're going to drag it down the building, the roof, and you can start to see how it shows up the seams in there as we come across in here. Kind of rain streaked and sunny. We'll add a little bit of a darker gray, and again we're going to streak it down the roofs to create that look. We can add a little bit of a dark brown to create a dirt effect. Again, we want to be subtle with this, so we're going to take most of it off, and you can barely see it, but it's there. A little more. I'm going to do the brown a little heavier on the lower roof because it's going to have gotten any dirt that came off the top roof is going to have landed on that. Now to emphasize that, we can use the very tip of the triangular sponge and we can run a little bit of dirt down the sides where it's dripped off the roof. Do the same thing over here. Just to come down the sides. We're going to use a little bit of our gray along the foundation. Also a little bit of the dirt, just to kind of create that look of dirt that's built up along there. And while it's hard to see on the model, there is a little bit of hardware on the doors. So I'm going to use a dark rust, and I'm going to very gently hit it right near the hinges on the doors. And we're going to add a little bit of gray to the doors, just because they would have gotten dirty over the years. There's not a lot of metal, so we don't need to do much rusting, but the dirt along the foundation adds a nice touch. And the key with weathering is you got to figure out what looks right to you. With this, the structure itself is finished. We're still going to add a loading dock that will be scratch built around it at a later date, and the next step is going to be to see if we can find a place for it on the layout. Okay, we found a possible spot for Dannen feeds, and as you can see, it fits right into on the edge of town. This may not be the final spot for it, but it looks good sitting behind the back with the backdrop of the tracks and the landscape behind it. So that wraps up this series. Stay tuned to the channel. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because I will do another video where we build the loading dock for this. So stay tuned for that.